Assalamu alaikum everyone. Welcome to another Saturday halaqah at the Usuli Institute. We have a great program lined up tonight. 2 surahs, a double feature, Al Kawthar and Al Asr. And we have our guest of honor, special speaker today, Dr. Khalid Abul Fadl. But first, a public service announcement. Over the past few weeks, there's been there's only one word for it really, it's a propaganda campaign. There's been a propaganda campaign about this music album. It's called Witness, just so people know here. And nobody's really raised any questions about where this music came from, who the artist is, and well, let's take a little bit deeper look beneath the surface, just see what exactly is going on here. Is this just as innocent as it seems? Is this really just spiritual music, or is it a little bit more? I mean, we can start with the artwork. If you notice, there's 3 birds. Is that the Trinity? We don't know. If you notice also, there's ladybugs at the bottom. There's no man bugs. Is that gender discrimination? Allahu Alam. I'm just raising questions here. All I'm doing is just raising questions, nothing more. You know, is there a connection here to some other kind of, you know, Christian propaganda type of thing? None of that's been proven, but it also hasn't been disproven. Just saying. Now start with, look at the track list. The first song is called The Call to Prayer. This is actually plagiarized. The artist here, and I'm not going to call her out by name, actually plagiarized the lyrics to this song without giving any credit or attribution. Secondly, there's a song on here called The Message. One of the lines says, "Fight it in your heart." You see how she takes the heart, a vessel of love, and turns it into a vessel for violence. Fight it in your heart. This is supposed to be Islamic music, guys, but, you know, I'm just raising questions here again. Let's see. There's a song here called The City of Angels, which is a vitriolic, classist critique against the wealthy of Los Angeles. This is classism at its finest and purest. And we know from the halaqas, from so many lessons, that we should not be criticizing the wealthy. This is one of the core messages that we've learned. But yet, somehow, this has been advertised to us as something good. Now, this is really about, you know, adults can make their own mind about what they want to listen to, but for the children, because these messages can also be harmful to the children. For example, there's a song called Cup of Tea. Do we want to really teach our children poor spelling and grammar? Is this the type of thing that we actually want to? Anyways, there's also a song on here called Tide. Like a song about laundry detergent on an Islamic album? Anyways, the plagiarism happens twice, because also one of the last songs is also the call to prayer. So, you know, everyone is free to make their own decision. And once again, I'm not going to call it the artist by name, because I'm going to keep it civil. But everyone is free to make their own decision about what they want to listen to. But for the children, there are some, you know, there's a song called Unsung Song. That is a logical contradiction. You know, like, if we teach this to the children, what type of generation are we raising? But yeah, that's really all I wanted to say. I just felt like I was given an opportunity. Allah put me in this position as to give the intro this week, and it's for a reason, so I can help correct. Because I'm not going to be silenced. We have to bear witness, and we all know that silence is violence. And if you silence me, then you violence me, and I'm not going to be violence either. Okay, so now we can get started with the halaqah.
I'm going to have to consider whether an unnamed someone should have the right to rebuttal at the end of the halaqah. I mean, we have to be procedurally fair after all.
We could just let her play her song from last night.
No. I think that would be... Okay, well, thank you, Rami, for this interesting introduction.
I'm just applying the halaqah, Shaykh, just bearing witness.
Yeah, especially if you silence me, violence me, who can take issue with that? Allahumma inni sa'ib, so it's like you can't say anything. Alhamdulillah. Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Subhanallah al-Ali al-Azim, walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على الحبيب المصطفى محمد خاتم الأنبياء والرسل أجمعين المرسل رحمة للعالمين وعلى آله الأطهار الميامين وعلى أصحابه المختارين وعلى من اتبعوا بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. اللهم اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي يا رب العالمين. So inshallah today Surah Al Asr and Surah Al Kawthar, we're really getting down to there's not really that much left in terms of the short surah. So we'll start with Surah Al Asr. Again, just to facilitate things, let's see how Muhammad Asa translates it. So both surah, although as we'll see with Surah Al Kawthar, there's a bit of a debate about whether Surah Al Kawthar is a Meccan revelation or a Medinian revelation. An interesting debate, but we'll get to that inshallah. Both surahs, excluding that debate about whether Kawthar is Medinian or Meccan, it is quite probable that both of these surah belong to the early Meccan period. Surah Al Asr was among the earliest revelations of the Quran. There are reports that it was revealed shortly after Surah Alam Nasrah Laka Sadrak, which in order would make it the 12th, 13th, or 14th surah of the Quran. Kawthar, in all likelihood, was revealed shortly after Al Asr, so that it was Al Asr and Surah Al Adiyat, which we've talked about, Wal Adiyat Rabha, and so on. So Surah Al Asr and Al Adiyat and Al Kawthar. And that cluster of surah, and we know that the earliest surah of the Quran affirm essential messages, essential moral, normative messages about values and about human outlooks and about the way Allah is teaching us to look at the world and understand and interpret the world that we live in, upon which everything is built. So everything that comes later in the Quran builds upon these essential outlooks. And they are, in my opinion, very much intended to work like in philosophical thought, you often refer to grand norms, or in law to principles of constitutionalism. In other words, that in order for human thought to be systematic and consistent, that the way human beings understand ethics and understand values is not to equate all moral values to one another. That's contrary to the way we live life and contrary to the way we experience life. Not all laws are the same or intended to work as the same, and not all values are the same or intended to work as the same, but there's a hierarchy of values. And as we said repeatedly, that these earlier surahs are supposed to be foundational, that shape and organize and structure your interpretation of all that comes after. Okay. So, Surah Al Asr, which we'll begin with, which in likelihood it was revealed before Surah Al Kawthar anyway. So let's look at the translation for a second. Muhammad Asad says, "Consider the flight of time. Verily man is bound to lose himself unless he be of those who attain to faith and do good works, and enjoin upon one another the keeping to truth, and enjoin upon one another patience in adversity." Wal Asr, the term Asr can have a variety of connotations, one of which is, as we see in Muhammad Asad's translation, Asr can be the passage of time, as opposed to, and there is a distinction in Arabic between al-Dahr and al-Asr, that al-Dahr is refers to permanent time, or to what is the word I'm looking for? Eternal time, while al-Asr refers to experienced periods of time. Now, there's a linguistic and grammatical debate. Is it referring to necessarily days or weeks, but all of that doesn't need to concern us. one can comfortably say that what Allah, and there is also, I should say, a debate is whether Allah is swearing by time or Allah is alerting us to consider the way human beings experience time. And on this debate, as a number of scholars have said, there is nothing that convinces us that Allah is swearing by the division of time into experienced periods. But the more likelihood and the more convincing thing is that Allah is indeed, and what's consistent with the surah, as we will see, is that Allah is calling upon us to reflect upon the human experiences within every time period that people live through. And what is it about the time period that people live through, or periods? No, every epoch, if we use, let's use that word, every epoch, however we divide time, every generational period, every if centuries are themselves an invention of human consciousness and human perception. So however we see the coming of a century or a passing of a century, human beings consistently experience time overwhelmed by their follies. And that is why, Wal Asr inna al-insana lafi khusr. What is the loss here? What is the khusr that Allah talks about? It says man is bound to lose himself, according to Muhammad Asad. Fi khusr. Al-khusr is a state of folly. It's not necessarily material loss, but it is a state of khusr is something that exceeds material loss. A state of khusr has the connotation of losing one's sense of purpose and losing one's sense of direction. So you experience time not as leading you anywhere, but in fact experience time in an artificial and false fashion. So what is the falsity and what is the artificiality in experiencing time that makes Wal Asr inna al-insana lafi khusr? Is that all human beings, as they survive or experience the epochs in which they experience, human beings consistently gravitate towards seeing their epoch as unique and exceptional, and again, this is as pointed out by numerous scholars, that as an exception to the moral laws that ought to guide human beings. Why do they see it as an exception? Because the human tendency is to look at the challenges that they experience within a time epoch as unparalleled and unequaled, as something that something that is particular and unique to the generation or the peer people who are experiencing a specific epoch. Khusr, as for as Al-Razi, for instance, in his tafsir also mentions, is that there is an arc to human experience, that you experience the epoch at a certain age with open optimism and a constant sense of a nearly arrogant belief that those that came before you, that you are an exception to those that came before you. That somehow that if those before you have gotten it wrong, will your generation will get it right. That type of attitude, that hubris, that false sense of confidence, that is quite common in the as human beings attain adulthood, attain rushd. But as you grow older, this is all from Razi's arguments about the arc of age in the experience of the epoch, that as you grow older, you start realizing more and more that in fact you are not an exception to past generations, and that the same moral challenges that confronted generations before you and defeated generations before you are the same moral challenges that you are wrestling with. But by then, the arc of khusr has been achieved. In other words, the arc from the folly of hubris and overconfidence to perhaps the folly of impatience and becoming pessimistic and what is the word I'm looking for? Skeptical. Or not even skeptical. What did you say? Jaded. Yeah, like becoming sort of jaded about the moral possibilities of time. That human beings from one epoch to another repeat the same mistakes. There is a cycle of moral failures that each generation falls into. Although each generation arrogantly at least starts out, according to Razi at least starts out thinking that no, we are an exception. We whatever plagued generations before us are not going to plague us. But the fact of the matter is that from a supernal divine outlook, if you look at the way that human beings experience and manage and deal with time, it is, and this is not obviously Razi, but this is, an elaboration of Hashia or a sharh upon, if you will, that, if you look at every generation that experiences things like tastes, like fashions, like perceptions of beauty and art and what matters of taste and so on, each generation experiences it as if it has an objective reality other than human perception and human construction. And in fact, it really doesn't. It is simply a collective human invention. Our view of aesthetics and the value we put at value we ascribe to aesthetics. Now, إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. So then Allah comes and says, it is not the subjectivity or there is nothing inherent in Al Asr, nothing inherent in the epoch of time itself that is either damned or doomed to failure. This, by the way, it taps into an old a theme that you find in Arabic poetry quite frequently, pre-Islamic poetry, where poets look at time as a foe and an enemy, cursed by destiny. So that theme that I am cursed by destiny because time will always defeat the human beings regardless of their morality. And among the poets of Mujun, we took a step further. Mujun were the poets of how do you translate Mujun? Mujun. The poets of, let's drink and have fun and be merry and the hell with it, because if we are all defeated by time, and if time is our enemy, and if it will defeat the moral and immoral equally, and if time is basically hedonistic, it's oppressive and hedonistic, whether you are virtuous or not virtuous, you will ultimately be defeated by time, then there is no point. And the answer is absolute hedonism. So the Shi'r al-Mujun, which was a class of poetry that was well known, consistently argued that point. Hedonism, because it is the only thing that makes sense. So Surah Al Asr, it looks to us like it's quite innocently just saying Wal Asr, but absolutely everyone that heard Surah Al Asr at the time of the Prophet ﷺ knew exactly what it is taking on. And when it said in that insana lafi khusr, a lot of people would be inclined to agree that yes, time is oppressive and defeats human beings, and time is deceptive, and time is tricky because it gives you initially it gives you a sense of confidence, a sense of timelessness, a sense of space, a sense that you have a considerable amount of time to do all the things that you fancy doing, but then it pulls a trick on you that before you know it, it's gone. And before you know it, there's nothing special about you. And before you know it, all the things that you thought you are going to change in your time have not happened, or not achieved. And unless you have the things that Surah Al Asr is talking about, then that defeat, that folly, that moral failure is in fact quite real. So what is it that Surah Al Asr says? Is إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. So first, to put at the center of time, to put at the center of every Asr, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There is, as Al-Ghazali says in Al-Ihya, there is no way that people with true belief, real iman, can perceive, experience, or understand time the way that a hedonist, although Ghazali says that there are plenty of Muslims who are hedonists in fact, And he says that these people that their iman is suri, is artificial, superficial. If Allah is at the center of your perception of time, then the very experience of time, the sharp mood swings between overconfidence and despair, between arrogance and being defeated and oppressed, are modified by that very state of iman. Second, وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ, that hardly needs commentary. That iman without what is the essence of time, believe it or not, as much as modern Muslims have deviated from that outlook, but the essence of time is service. How much service, what defines the quality of living within the paradigm of time, is amal al-salihat, is your actual service, not service to the self, but service to the other. And remember that when Surah Al Asr is revealed, we didn't even have prayers, we didn't have fasting of Ramadan, we didn't have any of the rituals. So when Surah Al Asr said وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ, everyone receiving the surah at the time understood that what it's referring to is exactly that: human service, doing good by others. The corruption that seeps in later, where people think that what it's talking about, when you hear Amilu Salihat, that what it's talking about is that you fast more days. That's not necessarily Amal Salihat, that's Amal Ta'a. And it's salih for you. Perhaps it gives you a few extra bounties, credits with Allah. But it is nothing like the credit you get when you actually serve the well-being of others. There was no salah, so the understanding that the corrupting understanding that comes later, the amal al-salihat, is for you to pray extra. That was completely absent when Surah Al Asr was revealed. But then we come to the pulsating heart of Surah Al Asr. And the reason that Surah Al Asr had the impact that it had in the Muslim tradition, so much so that we are told that many of the companions had embraced a habit that if they ever meet, they would never end their meeting without reciting Surah Al Asr. That every meeting that they would have, we would be concluded by reciting Surah Al Asr together. Or the ahadith that in which the Prophet is reported to have said that Surah Al Asr is equal to 1/3 of the Quran. Of course, you know my skepticism about these ahadith, but as I said in the past, it is a typically medieval way of emphasizing and underscoring the impact of a thing. And so what are these two elements? Tawasaw bil-haq wa tawasaw bil-sabr. Now, of course, the grammar here is very interesting, but at-tawasi bil-shay is not the repetitive talking about something. So if you and I always meet for 10 years, and every time for 10 years we talk about building let's say a well or digging a well. So 10 years, every time we meet, we talk about digging the well, but we've never actually taken a step to dig the well. Has there been Tawasi about digging the well? The answer is no. That's not Tawasi. Tawasi bishay is talking about something and accomplishing it, striving to do it. And that is why that expression is so profound, that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Tawasaw bil haqq, it means it's not just that they sit in comfortable settings and tell each other in abstract ways, do what is right, but they actually pursue what is right. So, التواصي بالحق is a philosophical outlook. It is a psychological and an epistemological meaning system of knowledge. It is a psychological outlook. It is a state of consciousness. It is a state of how you define what the relevance of time and the significance of time, and you evaluate the passage of time. That is a very, how we relate and evaluate and connect with the passage of time is one of the in the field of social psychology, that is as core to consciousness as you get. If you look at time as sort of night rolls into day and day rolls into night, and your role as the night and day roll is to sit and to stare at the sky and contemplate the mysteries, so that whether it's Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday, it really doesn't matter. What matters is what day you've managed to understand a mystery of existence. That's a very different state of consciousness. That one where you wear a watch and you are always conscious of, well, now it's 2 o'clock, now it's 3 o'clock, now we're 2 minutes late, now I have to move, go here. A state of the way you relate to time. If the way you relate to time is, well, if I spend 24 hours in one spot, not moving, the way I relate to myself is that I am dying, that I need to move to feel that I'm alive. I need to go from point A to point B. I need to go from here to there. It's very different psychology and state of consciousness, and it's a very different system of knowledge than if your attitude of time is that the more I spend in one spot, the more I relate to with this one spot, the more I deepen my relationship to space and time. And so it is actually a good thing for me to, and by the way, those of you, for instance, who've had any experiences in old countries, if you spent any time in the villages, one of the things you will notice in villages from Syria, Egypt, Turkey, Iran, is old people who are sit in one spot, not talking, staring out in space, and you look at them and you cannot relate to them because you are a very different psychological animal than they are. What the heck are they doing? Why are they just sitting there, always sitting in one spot, seeming to stare into nothing, talking to no one talking to them, and even when to you, you hardly can recognize that as relating to time. That's very different than someone like you who probably has a watch, who's probably constantly looking at a watch, who probably, if they sit in one spot and not move for a few hours, they start feeling like, they're being haunted by demons or something. So, but what the Quran comes and does, and it says what should be common, what should connect all of you to the passage of time, to Al Asr, is Tawasi bil-Haq, is to join one another. It is literally, the theory of Western thinkers that, theoretically constructed this whole idea of civic society, human beings coming together. And of course, in Western theory, the artificial contract, if you will, or that human beings all come together. Why? Because they discover they need one another, and they need one another from a selfish perspective. Like, I can't chop woods, so I need to but I can cook, for instance. So if the person who can cook can get with the person who can chop woods, I give up something, they give up something, I gain something, they gain something, and that's the basis of our cooperation. In Arabic, it's what they call an-nadra al-ijtima'iyya, the social philosophical outlook in the Quran is that you come together vowing over a principle, and the principle is the principle of Al-Haq. Now, Al-Haq is an all-inclusive term of whatever is truthful. So that's why we call Allah Al-Haq. Whatever is beyond circumstantialism, beyond contingency, in terms of the rightful status. So what's contingent about justice is how do we strike the balance to achieve justice. But the principle of justice itself is not contingent. So we are always obligated to achieve justice. And that is why justice is Al-Haq. Think of all the moral values that are imperative, from an Islamic point of view, they derive their imperativeness from the divine. So, for instance, in the Islamic outlook, why is there an obligation to render shahada, bear witness? In the Islamic outlook, because the ultimate haqq, al-haqq al-awhad, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said so. And modern Muslims, to the extent you want to understand how alienated modern Muslims have become from the Quranic ethic and the Quranic outlook, is that if you tell them, name the derivative huquq from al-haqq al-awhad, the basic derivative huquq in Islamic moral outlook, very few Muslims would be able to name anything. Because it's not a part of the educational system, it's not a part of how we teach them to relate to time. It's not, if we don't teach them that part of the reason, for instance, that in the way you experience time, you don't need to feel a sense of fulfillment as to the way you relate to time. You don't need to feel, in order to feel mastery over time, in order to feel that you have control over time, you don't need to defy your parents. You don't need to be obstinate towards your parents. You don't need to be rude towards your parents. Why? Because you and your parents are supposed to cooperate and work together to achieve Al-Haq. It's a very different outlook. The reason that a teenager wants to be rude to their parents is because they want to feel that my time is different than yours. And if I'm nice to you, then I'm conceding that your time is like mine, and your failures are going to be my failures. Where I cannot allow your failures to be my failures, and I cannot allow the admission that your time and my time are similar, and so I am going to be rude to you. So to underscore that point, to stress that point, the reason the Islamic outlook comes and sort of turns the table on all of that, comes and says, people, it is not about the amount of ibadah, it is not about all the ritualistic symbolisms that you adhere to. It is about as substantive a concept as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is substantive, and that is haqq, the haqq itself, in all its connotations. And a Tawasi, why does it say a Tawasi? Because it knows that human beings will struggle to recognize Al-Haq and will struggle to achieve Al-Haq. But here's the why of Tawasaw bis-sabr. Why do you need Tawasi bis-sabr? It didn't say wasabiru, and they were patient. No, because the only way that society will persist in the pursuit of Al-Haq is that if wherever you turn, you find a social bonds being formed around diligence and deliberation. So, give you a very vivid example. Let's say I am on a project to finish the tafsir of the Quran and publish the tafsir of the Quran. Am I on a project of Al-Haq? I would sure hope so. That if we are in a dedicated mission to study the Quran and to publish a study of the Quran. Now, if your relationship to time is defined by your cause, you hardly notice, oh, I've been doing this for a year, I've been doing this for 2 years, I've been doing this for 3 years, oh, it's time for me to do something else. You stay with the cause until you accomplish the cause. But imagine if you start getting bored or frustrated or whatever, and everywhere you turn, your social circles, you say, I'm tired, oh, I'm bored, oh, I'm fed up, oh, and what you hear is not your obligation is to persevere and to be diligent, and to, in other words, the feedback you're receiving is not the Islamic feedback of a tawasi bis-sabr, but the feedback that you're receiving is, your feelings of supreme. Your desires is what you should listen to. If you feel bored, you want to move on, then move on. Nothing in the realm of Al-Haq gets achieved when human beings no longer abound by a tawasi bil-sabr. In the same way that every time I would approach my grandmother and my mother, rahimahumullah, may Allah bless their souls both, and every time I would have a complaint that had to do with any Islamic principle, this sheikh, I don't get it. I've tried to impress him so many times, and he's never impressed by me, and it just makes me feel like that he has just no time for me, and he always picks someone else to be the reviewer in the halaqah, which is sort of a point of prestige. And every single time I would go to my mother and grandmother, and I knew exactly what they were going to say, as-sabr. It took me ages to understand how wise their advice was. Get over yourself. Because what matters is it about haqq, and what is sabr? If they heard something from me that it touched upon this issue of haqq, like I'm complaining about something immoral, then they no longer counsel the sabr. We had situations like that where I went to them and I said, my complaint is XYZ, and it was something about morality. Someone doing something really wrong. And I never heard them counsel a sabr. Take action, because your obligation to Al-Haq is sacrosanct. In fact, you cannot serve Al-Haq except through Al-Haq, meaning you cannot serve Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Al-Haq al-Awwal wal-Akhir, you cannot serve the supreme Haq except through the venues of Al-Haq, which include, again, to strike upon the obvious, something like justice, something like dignity, karamat al-insan, the dignity of human beings, something like ilm, knowledge, and the pursuit of knowledge. So, I've already mentioned that the habit of the Sahaba, that they would always recite Surah Al Asr, and when you reflect upon why they've made it a point that whenever they meet, they would always end the meeting with reciting Surah Al Asr, or numerous narratives about the blessings of a Surah Al Asr, if you want, numerous in the Islamic tradition, numerous discourses upon, like one of the who was it that I believe it was Al-Ghazali. For some reason when I said Al-Ghazali and then something sprung in my mind that no, it was someone else, but who said that if that in Surah Al Asr is the summation of the entire Islam, and so that if a Muslim knew nothing of the Quran but the Fatiha and Surah Al Asr, it would be enough for them. You find a lot of these types of, I would say, love statements directed at Surah Al Asr in the Islamic tradition. And I think it is because Muslims understood, especially when you keep in mind that when Surah Al Asr was revealed, the way Arabs related to time, to al-usur, and the concept of al-asr was very different. And the way they philosophized hedonism, this surah directly took it on. And especially that when Surah Al-Asr was revealed, there were no rituals that they can. So they understood fully well that when Surah Al-Asr was saying Tawasi bil-Haq, it was declaring a revolution in their society. And the Meccans understood it as well. And that's part of the unfoldings of, the increasing hostility of the Meccans towards the Quran, and the accusation that it was not just another poet, pushing or peddling his way of life, as there were many of them in Mecca, but that Muhammad was a revolutionary, was upsetting their entire way of life. And it's because of messages like this. Okay, what time is it? Surah Al Kawthar there is a interesting debate about Surah Al Kawthar. What is it? That Ibn Abbas and Qatada both report that Surah Al-Kawthar is a Medinian surah, and the report further says that they were sitting in the mosque in Medina when Surah Al-Kawthar was revealed, and then they described the Prophet ﷺ, his first reaction to receiving Surah Al-Kawthar. And of course, the fact that they say that he was sitting in, or they were praying or sitting in Masjid al-Medina, makes it then a Medinian surah. The problem with this narrative is manifold. One, it's contradicted by the majority of other narratives, so that we have cumulative narratives from many other sources that say that no, Surah Al-Kawthar was revealed shortly after Surah Al Asr in Mecca. And as to Ibn Abbas, who is a very important authority on the Quran, there are actually two contradictory narratives. One that says that it was revealed as the Prophet was sitting in Medina, or in the mosque in Medina, and there's another narrative, again attributed to Ibn Abbas, in which Ibn Abbas says that Surah Al-Kawthar was revealed in Mecca, and that when the Prophet ﷺ migrated to Medina, all the migrants, all the muhajirun, knew Surah Al-Kawthar already, and that it was received by us, the natives of Medina, after the migration. Does it make a difference? There is a technical point that has to do with how we interpret two words, fanhar and abtar. As commentators have said, that if it was revealed in Medina, then it's more likely that the word fanhar and the word abtar, in shani'aka wal abtar, should be understood one way. But if it was revealed in Mecca, then they should be understood a different way. I will explain this, inshallah, but then tell you that I don't find this disagreement convincing. I mean, I believe Surah Al-Kawthar is clearly Meccan, and I don't have doubts about that. But I think methodologically, all the material about, if it was in Medina, the word fanhar has to mean something. I just don't find it very persuasive, as I will explain. Okay, so the translation, I'm sure, will be straightforward enough, and then we'll take it from there. Behold, we have bestowed upon you good in abundance. That's a Kawthar, the word Kawthar. Hence pray unto thy sustainer alone, and sacrifice unto God alone. That's fasalli li rabbika, pray unto to your God, wanhar, sacrifice. Okay. Inna sha'ni'aka huwa al-abtar. Verily, he that hates you has indeed been cut off from all good. Okay. That's the way Muhammad Asad translated the word abtar. Okay, so first, very short, very succinct, and also with a very powerful message. And that's why I also think that it is among the foundational surah of Mecca. Inna a'tainaka kawthar. So first, there is, if you look at something like Tafsir al-Mawardi, Al-Mawardi will tell you that there is no less than 9 different interpretations given to the word Kawthar. And obviously, I mean, I've done this tafsir line by line, so if you want to, in my line by line tafsir, I went through all the different interpretations. We don't need to do that. But the basic sort of disagreement is Kawthar, the word Kawthar refers to whatever is bountifully good. Like it's like an excess of good, a lot of good. The word kathra comes from the same root as Kawthar. Kathra means an increase or a lot. Kawthar is derived from the same root. Okay. So, but what is the Kawthar that Allah is referring to here? It could be referring to what has been given to the Prophet Muhammad specifically, alayhi salatu wassalam. And here, as many commentators have said, the likelihood then, it's like saying, we have given you the Quran, or we have given you the prophecy. I mean, we don't want to get into all the 9 different meanings, but okay. We have given you the Quran, or we have given you the prophecy. We have given you, Muhammad, something that is very special. But those who saw the message of Surah Al Kawthar as clearly transcending just what has been given to the Prophet ﷺ, said, and I agree with this view, that what it's talking about is not just talking to the Prophet ﷺ, it is talking to human beings who are believers, those who said, I believe, and are now going to be following the Prophet of Islam. And that sort of existentialist reminder that you human beings have been given a lot, which is consistent with the repeated message of the Quran, أَلَمْ نَجْعَلْ لَهُ عَيْنَيْنِ وَلِسَانًا وَشَفَتَيْنِ وَهَدَيْنَاهُ النَّجْدَيْنِ. That the blessings of Allah are numerous, whether, from and a human being avails themselves of the blessings of Allah every second of the day. So the blessings of Allah are numerous. فَصَلِّ لِرَبِّكَ وَانْحَرْ. So there is a principle there. If you truly understand that the blessings of Allah are numerous, and it's the same message that you find in Surah Al-Fatiha. So what follows? What follows is gratitude. And the gratitude takes the form of salah and nahr. And nahr means sacrifice. Here is where the Mecca-Medina debate becomes a bit important, or relevant, I guess, is that those who said that it was a Medinan revelation said, when it said fasalli, okay, that's understood, pray. And those who said that it was revealed in Medina said it's referring to the 5 prayers. Wanhar, they said it's referring to the sacrificing of animals, especially in Hajj. They said the word nahr in the Quran of Medina can only mean nahr, that you engage in Hajj, and that's when you slaughter animals and feed the poor. So they understood this as saying, well, pray and sacrifice and feed the poor. If it was revealed in Mecca, then there is no way that wanhar could mean sacrifice animals, because Muslims did not, in Mecca, did not engage in animal sacrifice. They wouldn't even be allowed to do Hajj, Muslim Hajj. And so they said that wanhar has to mean the original meaning of the word before it became a technical, legal term, wanhar meaning and sacrifice. So fasalli then is worship, not in all forms of worship, not limited to the 5 prayers, because it's revealed in Mecca before the 5 prayers were decreed. Salli means you, O God, worship. And wanhar means that you, O God, in order to fully and truly show gratitude, you must accept the idea that you must sacrifice for the sake of your belief. Now, note that in Mecca, it was very important to start building the psychological readiness and the moral understanding that you, Muslims, have a long way ahead of you. This is in the first year of the Meccan revelation, and they have no idea what's coming, but Allah knows that an attitude of expression of gratitude through sacrifice is essential if any of this is going to succeed. If they are not ready to sacrifice. But I take the meaning as well beyond the Mecca. I don't believe any system of Iman can work without sacrifice. No cause in human history, in our experience of Usur al-Dahr, of the epochs of time, has any cause ever survived without sacrifices upon sacrifices upon sacrifices. The difference between a school of thought that survived and a school of thought that went extinct is the existence of students that were willing to sacrifice. In direct proportion to the sacrifices is the survival. The difference between a cause that survived or a nation that thrived, or an understand, or anything in human, God's sunnah is that in direct proportion to the sacrifice is the success. So when Allah says, فَصَلِّ لِرَبِّكَ وَانْحَرْ, Allah is putting us on alert that if you think that this is about prayer, and khalas, you're done. Oh, I'm good a Muslim, I pray, which you hear all the time in the backward state that Muslims are in. Well, I'm a good Muslim, I pray. Okay, yeah, but where is the nahr? Where are the sacrifices? Do you actually think that you are entitled to whatever indulgences you tell yourself you're entitled to? Or do you accept that in order to actually be committed and have a system of belief, what is needed is sacrifice? Okay. Inna shani'aka huwa al-abtar. Okay, why does this relate to the Mecca-Medina debate? The folks that said that this was revealed in Mecca often repeated a narrative. Now, who the person is, they're disagreed. Some, said that it was Abu Jahl. Some said that it was Utbah. Others said that it was Abu Lahab. It doesn't matter. But they all repeated narratives that in which reportedly someone insults the prophets, the Prophet ﷺ, and some of these votes then say, well, when it says inna shani'aka huwa al-abtar, in one of the reports actually that one of them suffocates the Prophet ﷺ, that tries to, and that, so what it's saying, that it's saying you're that person who tried to suffocate you is the person who will truly be defeated. And so they say that this is a Meccan prediction, that do you see these people who are oppressing you, or this person that oppressed you now, you don't realize, no one realizes this, but in the future this person will, their fate will be better, will be that they will be killed or defeated generally, because they have, if it's certain people, then it's killed, other people, then it's defeated. Okay. Now, there's another very different narrative from the folks that said that Surah Al Kawthar was revealed in Medina. And what they said is that when the Prophet ﷺ, his male children died, the kuffar taunted him, or the kuffar said, Butira Aqub Muhammad, that they bragged about or gloated about that Muhammad has no progeny. His line, his lineage will die with him. And that when Allah says, Inna shani'aka huwa al-abtar, let's see if I'm sure. No, okay, doesn't refer to it in Muhammad. That basically that Allah is saying, this is not what they gloated about, that you are without lineage or without progeny, it's like saying it's actually, they are the ones who are the ones of true loss. It's not you who lost your children. It is them who lost their moral cause and their moral direction. Okay, what I understand from Surah Al Kawthar, I think it's actually very straightforward, that Inna shani'aka huwa al-abtar. You people who will commit, though, to a path of fasalli, of gratitude to your Lord, wanhar, and sacrifice for your Lord, Allah is alerting us to a cosmic truth. you will inevitably have your persecutors. That when Allah refers to shani'aka, and as we said, that I believe it's not just referring to Muhammad والسلام, but it is to all Muslims in all ages, in all times, that saying, I know that all of you, by virtue of the fact of accepting the very dynamic, the very equation of I am cognizant of all the blessings that Allah has given, and I choose to respond to these blessings through gratitude and through sacrifice, that you will have your persecutors. You will be shani'aka. There will those who will target you and persecute you. But it is also an article of faith. And because it's extremely challenging to actually believe it and internalize it. That as an article of faith, you must believe that true power, true strength, true victory is in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and not in your persecutor. Inna shani'aka huwa al-abtar, meaning that who persecutes you is the one who is truly, in truth, defeated. Now, I take that a step further and say whether that defeat is in a material way. Okay, let me give you a very concrete example. I believe every time the Israelis murder, because they every single week now they murder Palestinians at will. Every time they murder a Palestinian, they assassinate a Palestinian, their defeat becomes deeper and inevitable. This is when you are, yes, and that's where a Tawasi bis-sabr, because if you don't have sabr, you will despair and say, they will never be defeated. This will never change. Immorality, my faith in God has to tell me immorality has to be defeated. Whether I see it in my time, and that is why if I actually care about someone, I tell them don't be immoral. Because you are defying Sunnatullah fi kawn, you are defying Allah's Sunnah. Your defeat will be inevitable, whether I live long to see it or not. So if I actually care about you, that's why, for instance, when I see injustice in Muslim countries, it bleeds my heart, because I know the consequences of the immorality of justice is, whether it happens now or in the future, destruction. You can't just keep it is impossible. No people in history have continued a path of immorality and injustice indefinitely. It catches up with them because it is Allah's sunnah that it will catch up with them. So alhamdulillah, that is Surah Al Kawthar. Now we have a bit of a conundrum. We can have Rami come back, continue his warnings about whatever he's obsessed about, or we can give Witzki the right to rebuttal. You want to rebut? Oh my God, Witzki wants to rebut. Okay. Alhamdulillah, I am stepping out of this. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I am now silenced.
No, you will not be violent.
And according to Rami, I'm also violenced. This is Witzki, everyone.
Assalamu alaikum. Am I sitting in the right spot?
No, wait, your camera.
Can you adjust the camera and also the other recording camera?
Yeah, we're fine.
Also, are we going to do a Q&A session?
After the rebuttal.
Okay.
So I just took a little moment during this wonderful halaqah to try and reflect upon the lessons of the surah and use them to process this experience of the introduction. You speak your hate, but at what cost? See, fleeting, empty words by time will be lost. Sit yourself down, ask, what takes up my time? Is it God? Is it truth? Or just games and rhyme? The blessings you've been granted are too numerous to count. You're blessed with love and talent in an abundant amount. Instead of bringing others down with such harsh and cruel play, be grateful, sacrifice for truth, lower yourself and pray. Time is on your side. Truly, it is not too late to change your mind, hear your heart, and elevate your state. Either way, my brother, I thank you today, for the test you offer me helps me stride in patience way.
Oh my God. Okay, guys, for you who are not initiated in the battles that go in the affairs that go on Usuli, I will. Rami will never admit this, not on threat of death, but he actually loves Whiskey and greatly admires her, and Whiskey loves Rami and greatly admires him. This is all just jostling between brothers and sisters and poetry. So, don't freak out and think that the world is coming down and life is ending and things like that. So just put things in. Okay, and Whiskey after Taraweeh yesterday recited an unbelievable poem about her relationship with Allah, and I don't know how she just comes up with this poetry out of nowhere. Yeah, subhanAllah. Just a gift, a true gift. And Romney is gifted in poetry in other ways. Yeah, just a different angle of
We want to hear Whiskey's poem
what poem?
from yesterday, the one you talked about.
Oh, do you have it? Okay.
Not the song, right?
Yay!
No, that's a song.
Not the song, not the song that took down Rami.
Okay, so the poem is: whenever my eyes dwell upon the earth, or my ears wander through your loving words, it is as though the chain around my heart, the shackle locked in grief, is torn apart. For I remember when I see the trees, or taste the sweetness gifted by the bees, or hear a melancholic melody healed and embedded in your harmony, that I'm a fool to think you're far from me. You're closer to my door lock than its key. You're closer to my heart than its own beat. You're closer to myself than I can be. Nothing happened, nothing happened.
No books destroyed?
Just an accident style.
Thank you for sharing. That was amazing.
A beautiful poem, subhanAllah. Okay, because my wife insists, any questions? Do you want to handle the Q&A?
Let Rami whip out one of his beautiful poems too, because he's really talented.
I can't. I don't want to. I mean, let her have the spotlight for a moment. Haram. You know, I don't want to overshadow after. Okay. How do I open? Are there any questions? Okay, the first question that I have is, how do I deprogram my children after listening to Witness?
Who's that question from?
It's anonymous. Is there
I refuse to answer that question. I refer them to Rami Koujah.
Okay. Are there any questions from anyone here? No? And there's no questions from the chat. Is there anything from YouTube besides what you sent me?
How close is it to iftar?
A couple of minutes.
there's
There's
a couple of
there's
minutes
one
more?
question here, but this looks like it's the only question. For Surah Al Asr, you mentioned that Muslims are no longer taught the derivatives or moral derivatives from Al-Haq al-Awwal. What are these derivatives?
It's not a single list, but it is moral concepts that in Islamic theology that necessarily exist because of Al-Haq al-Awwal, because of Al-Haq, Al-Haq meaning the truth of the divine truth. So for instance, the Islamic God, when I say Islamic God, meaning the Islamic understanding of God, God as God explained God's self in the Quran, God as God presented God's self to muwahhidun, to people of Tawheed, to the monotheists. That this God is just, and so the existence of a just God makes justice a derivative value. The existence of this God makes truth a derivative value. That lying can never be morally praiseworthy. Even if lying under certain very rare circumstances can be exceptions to the law, meaning لضرورة من الضروريات, for a necessity that you tolerate a lie. Like for instance, if I feel that telling someone that their loved one have passed away right this minute will lead them to have a nervous breakdown, so I postpone telling them until they are in a better situation to handle it. That type of thing. But we know the imperative of truth. We don't engage in utilitarian evaluations of do we say to speak the truth or not speak the truth, because of what Al-Haq said about the nature of Al-Haq and the nature of Al-Haq to truth as a value. Others, like the very idea of ihsan, or the very idea, which is, I'll give you, this actually is a good example, the idea of al-wud. Now, al-wud, al-wadud can mean a number of things. Among these things is al-wadud is the loving, al-wadud is the caring, al-wadud is the friendly. In poor English translation, but I think it will do for now. What is amicable and friendly. So if you take the understanding of Al-Haq out, we might, and in fact, in in secular philosophy, they have very serious philosophical debates about whether would, meaning being friendly, is an ethic, is a moral value at all or no. Why? Because if you take like just secular philosophy, God is not a part of it. You'd say, okay, let's say you have two neighbors, and this, of course, because they're debating what they learned from Christianity, that do you have a moral obligation to seek out a friendly relationship with your neighbor, to actually sacrifice your comfort in order to further friendly relationships with your neighbor? Well, the Bible told them they do, but in secular philosophy, so much ink has been spilt on deconstructing what the Bible has said, that, honor thy neighbor. They say, that doesn't make any sense. Why should I honor my neighbor? Well, and it's so much philosophical stuff about, how it's a false paradigm, how, if it's one thing if I'm going to benefit from my neighbor, but, just to honor my neighbor, even if I'm never going to benefit from my neighbor, even if I'm never going to need my neighbor, what type of nonsense is this? But in Islam, Al-Haq, who is Al-Wadud, who then imposes the moral duty of would. And Al-Wud means that we are obligated to extend that quality of friendliness to the other, because it's a moral imperative derived from Al-Haq. So it's one way to teach this, if we were restructuring our educational systems, right, is to start students first at the very elementary, one of the very, very elementary books that talks about the basic moral qualities that derive from Al-Haq or from Al-Sifat Al-Ilahiyya. And as they progress, you introduce them into a more involved text, because they range from like a very elementary, something that was written, just an introduction to the lay people that would be taught by shuyukh in halaqat after Jum'ah before colonialism, to sophisticated multi-volume works that work out all the philosophical issues and derivatives and so on, that were mastered by doctoral students of theology students in higher studies. All of that is, Muslims don't realize that in the colonial era, which, remember, lasted several hundred years, so we're not talking about 10 years or 20 years, you can completely erase the way people think in a few hundred years. And in the colonial era, our moral philosophy became thoroughly Western. And when we tried to Islamize, we created this sort of weird animal that is neither Western nor Islamic, a hodgepodge of the Western colonial morality that we learned through 300 years of brainwashing, to our attempts at Islamization that often never exceed reading Riyadh al-Salihin or reading just a book of hadith. Do you think a book of hadith is somehow going to undo centuries of moral brainwashing? Obviously not. It can't. And so, ask yourself, why is it, for instance, that my grandmother, who still, grew up under British occupation, but even then, my grandmother, it was the most most, she would always have me send me on errands, me and my siblings, obviously, to serve our neighbors. The idea that our neighbors would want or need, and or that we can just spend our life oblivious to what our neighbors are going through, it was just as immoral as you can possibly humanly get. If I, as a child, would say something like, "Why do I have to go get them bread? They're just our neighbors." Oh my God, it would have been the end of the world. Sadly, I have to say, I don't know anyone in my generation who's like that anymore. It's gone. You know, it's not like you go to Egypt and find it. You might find it a little bit, but Muslims have, especially, once they bought into the lie of independence, post-colonialism. Now we're free, and they really thought that now that they're free and stopped fighting colonialism, that somehow they can just very easily regain their Islamic morality and identity just by virtue of, going to Jum'ah prayer and hearing a khutbah, or turning on a TV program that is approved and sponsored by Wazarat al-Awqaf, the Ministry of Religious Affairs. The post-colonial generation was the periods of since colonialism were periods of intense alienation of Muslims from their culture, because if they had lines of resistance when colonialism was, because they wanted to defy colonialism, so they kept many of their madrasas open. They continued to defy by studying certain traditions and certain texts, etc., etc. Once colonialism said, okay, well, we're formally not there, Muslims woke up to the reality that, the vast majority of Muslims, and this is Muslims, including Muslims from Egypt, Syria, Saudi Arabia, you name it, any. Do you think just because they're raised speaking Arabic, they can actually read these books of Torah? They can't. The vast majority of the books of Torah, because they're Arabic, in fact, a student that learns Arabic anew, in other words, starts in college and studies Arabic for the express purpose of doing scholarship with these texts, is probably more capable in handling the Arabic of these texts than someone who was born, raised Arabic speaking, went through the Egyptian school system, for instance, or even Saudi school systems. I mean, I meet Saudis all the time, and I'm shocked. I mean, they're specialized in law. They're coming to the U.S. to get a master's in law or a doctorate in law, and I discover when I have them in class that their English is much better than their Arabic, far better than their Arabic. And when they do research, I discover that they really, when I tell them, read مقدمة الغزالي في أصول الفقه on حسن القبح, and I discovered that the vast majority of students just cannot penetrate that text, no matter what. That's, you defeat a civilization first by taking away its language. Everything else follows. If someone told me, what would be in Arabic, learning of Arabic, mastering Arabic is very important, because our intellectual product was written primarily in Arabic, and then in a secondary degree in Persian and Turkish and Urdu. So Arabic and Persian, Turkish and Urdu is the kernel and essence of saving the Islamic civilization.
Grace reminded me to ask you about your engagement with these two surahs.
This was a very beginning of the process. It's Asr and Kawthar, very early on, and so you even notice in my review of them now, because I reviewed my notes, I was still a little bit over influenced by the tafsir tradition. So you notice, I would say, oh, there's how this is Medina. Those who said it was revealed in Medina, those who said it was revealed in Mecca, and here's how it affects the meaning. And but they were necessary steps along the path because, for instance, when you realize from just realizing, for instance, how cumulative the reports that a lot of the companions made it a point to, whenever they have a meeting, they always recite Surah Al Asr. I knew that these people were not like us. They didn't just recite Surah Al Asr and then the next thing they're doing has nothing to do with these people took the words of the Quran very seriously. So I spent a lot of time reflecting upon what would produce that social habit, and why particularly Surah Al Asr. And then as you read more and more, and you read particularly the adabiyat Surah Al Asr, meaning like the way Surah Al Asr influenced poetry, the way it influenced prose, the way it that they really, they as I said, that Tawasi Al-Haq was really nothing short of a revolutionary call. That the way I'm going to relate to you is not in terms of whether I like you or not, is in terms of our relationship as to our collaboration for the sake of Haqq. And then when I later on realized that, for instance, that how this literature was connected to what emerged soon after, the idea al-hubb fillah, that I love you in the way of God, or you are my brother in the way of God, or you are my sister in the way of God. And unlike us, they took these ideas very seriously. I mean, the minute someone would say, I love you in the way of God as my brother, they became inseparable. And so you always then and historians would record that such person was such person became the brother of such person, or such person became the mawla of such person. So it was significant enough that it would even be recorded in the annals of history. That when you realize that what was essential for this step is the relationship in Haqq, is that it's as if these early Muslims, what they learned from the Prophet is, I don't want to hear if your habits and your tastes are synchronized, or in synchronicity. What is the expression I'm looking for?
Yeah, synchronized with.
Yeah, with such and such person. I want to know how you collaborate in the mission of Haqq. That's a revolution. That's exactly how a revolution is. And so, yeah, these were very early Suwar, but they were, when you start a mission and your first excitement was Al-Fatiha. Maybe we'll talk about this later, but my second excitement was, shortly after Al-Fatiha, was Qul Huwa Allahu Ahad and Qul Ya Ayyuhal Kafirun. And then Surah Al Asr and Al Kawthar, I don't remember if it was like my third or like fourth, meaning, was there something in between these? But and I did Al Kawthar first, and then I did Al Asr. So I actually studied them in reverse order. Then I presented them. But as you're studying these short surahs and you're praying on them, and your prayers are being answered, and you get these flashes of understanding and comprehension, your confidence builds up, your excitement builds up, your addiction builds up, your obsession builds up. Um, yeah. So these are the my memories with these surahs.
We have one more question. I wanted to ask, actually, before we get to that one. It's been a long time since, but from what I remember is that when the Mufassirun, when they're commenting on Wanhar, they're referring to sacrificing a particular type of camel, like a very expensive camel. I mean, do you want to comment maybe on?
Yeah, I mean,
what
these are. Uh, I believe in the line, line by line tafsir. I talked about this. I mean, they're all material about one har means that when you sacrifice, are you face the qibla. That one har means no, you sacrifice certain types of animals. That one har means some have even said one har means the way you put your right over your left in prayer. I mean, so the range is. But I mean, if you're interested in all this range and why, then listen to the line by line tafsir. I've spent a lot of time looking into why they said this and why they said that, and it's none of it is what it all lacks is that is a relationship to a moral message of the surah, and Nahr didn't come into the picture, and I believe that's why some of them insisted that this was a Medina revelation. When I'm absolutely convinced that it's not a Medina revelation. To try to connect the word Nahr to what later on became known as the practice of Nahr in Hajj, I think it's forced. And I think Nahr really at that time meant in Mecca, early in Mecca, it just meant sacrifice.
My question about that was because from what I remember reading that there was, I mean, that there was a practice of Nahr. People before Islam used to sacrifice animals, but my question is, like, using the specific word Nahr for sacrifice, does it actually convey the meaning that the sacrifice that you have to be prepared to make is going to be a very costly sacrifice, not just like.
Huh. I didn't actually think of that. Maybe you're right. Maybe you're right. I didn't think of that. I mean, one har, granted, you don't refer to sacrifice as nahr unless it is substantial sacrifice, just linguistically. So minor sacrifices cannot be referred to as nahr. So is it not just substantial sacrifice, but even really costly sacrifice? I mean, if considering what Allah was preparing Muslims of Mecca, knowing what they're going to face and preparing them for it, it would make a lot of sense. But I would need to think more about that because I hadn't thought about it before. Makes sense to me, but yeah, I would need to look into it.
Okay, the final question was from the YouTube chat is, my question is, how do I reconcile my want for financial freedom yet not become attached to it? I understand wealth is temporary and that we should not let it get in our hearts.
SubhanAllah, I mean, Yeah, money is without a shadow, I mean, without a doubt, the one, if it's probably the hardest fitna is money. Um, there are all types of people who might pass every test, but not the test of money. And I remember my grandmother used to tell me a story about um, a someone that apparently they knew growing up, who uh, was, you know, a very decent human being and everything, but except his relationship to money. And the day that uh, he lost a substantial amount of money, he apparently suffered a heart attack on the spot and died. And like that, it's, that some people, their relationship to money becomes truly. So how do you try to guard against that? There's there's only, other than prayer and dua, but nothing is as effective as giving, as forcing yourself to consistently um, engage in sadaqah, meaning to give away. It is, it is, you know, the desire if someone is living precariously, meaning they want to keep a roof over their head and they're barely able to make it, or they want to just be able to know that they have something that will continue paying for their medical bills as they grow old, if they whenever they need medical help, because they know they don't have anyone who's going to step in and help take care of them. That's not um, uh, that I think that's a healthy concern, and continuing to wanting to be able to save money, but always in order, so that the process of saving money in order to literally earn Allah's blessings, so that Allah will bless this money and Allah will help this money multiply in blessings and only be spent on what is good. Constantly purify your savings through by sadaqah. Um, every time you do sadaqah, you purify whatever money that you hold. And so it's not that anyway, you know, it's not an Islamic ethic to tell you you have to, you know, of course, it's not that the expectation is that you give away everything, so that you, it is that you constantly purify, and whenever, and be harsh with yourself, that the and very frank with yourself, that if you, with that question, I mean, am I now holding on to X amount of money because I really feel unsafe, or my conditions are unsafe, or is it because I um, have become addicted to that sense of, and if you are not sure that you can be truthful, I mean, in the old system is that you have a relationship with a sheikh or someone who's very pious, like a parent or a grandparent, who is also moral, who's not going to just say something to please you. That if you can't make the call yourself, that you go to them and say, here are the facts, help me make the call. I mean, that's part of, you know, the is that modern philosophy tells us, defer to no one, trust no one, because you are your own God. Well, that doesn't work Islamically. And Islamically, we need practice in 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 being in examples in life to look up to, and to not live as isolated moral islands, but to engage our morality through God-fearing, pious, righteous discourse and engagement. And this is the tawasul part. That, if you live as an island, I and only I who is qualified to make the moral call as to whether I am acting righteously or not, then you are as good as lost. No one can exist this way. No one. I'm not even sure that the companions of the Prophet ﷺ could have existed this way. If you look at their seerah, the extent to which they counseled one another, and sometimes in ways that are shocking to us, because they were often harsh with one another and very into one another's privacies. That's a tawasi. That's exactly a tawasi. Now, of course, it's challenging because we live in an age where you just do your due diligence. Don't just trust anyone. Just do your homework. And, if trust is like, when they say free speech is a social habit, responsibility in handling free speech is a social habit. So is trust. The reason we are so bad, we make so many mistakes when we trust people, is because we don't have a lot of practice. The way post-colonial society has conditioned us is that we don't, so we don't have much practice with the whole dynamics of who do you trust and who do you not trust, and what are the warning signs, and how do you protect yourself, and but nevertheless, always keep in mind that counsel is part of the moral process. You are never anyone who has themselves as their own moral judge, solely and exclusively, has a fool for a judge. If you make yourself into an island and you say no one can judge me but me, then good luck. You'll have very rude awakenings in the hereafter. We are social animals. لِتَعَارَفُوا. And التواصي بالحق is that we have to build relations of trust where we expose ourselves to moral criticism and moral feedback and exchange. So it's not just I'm on the receiving end. But yeah.
Okay, another question came in. Do you wanna?
We have to break fast. Okay, go ahead, ask. But it's the last one.
Okay.
This will be the last question.
I think it's similar, so you might be able. When it comes to having a healthy concern with finances, how do we provide goods and services in a way that makes these services financially accessible to the poorest amongst us, while also being able to pay for our own needs, especially in a day and age when Islamic financial vehicles like Al-Haq are rare?
Yeah, that's I'm not sure. Yeah, I mean, there are parts that are complicated and parts that are not complicated. We live now. So we know that the Rohingyas, for instance, are really facing on the brink of mass starvations. So are the Yemenis. We know that many Syrian refugees in the Idlib region and in the camps in Turkey, because of the shortage in resources, are at risk of human trafficking. Because what happens is that they're so desperate that when human traffickers show up in Turkey or in near Idlib, in the refugee camps near Idlib, and then they go into these, spread in the refugee camps that there are jobs open. People are so desperate that they will force themselves to believe that there are actually job opportunities, as in restaurants or servers in Turkey somewhere. And of course, when they show up for these jobs, they disappear forever. So I'm just saying that that's where the money helps, because it helps convince these people that they can feed their children and they shouldn't take such dangerous risks because they're so desperate. And the venues to give money to causes like this, especially through international humanitarian NGOs, is the most safe way, because they don't turn the money over to the Yemeni government or to the Syrian government. Organizations like the Red Cross or the Red Crescent or so on. So that's one realm of charity and sadaqah. The other is one where you need to invest research, and that's supporting local Muslim organizations, like organizations, for instance, that provide shelter for abused Muslim women, organizations that Muslim educational organizations like Usuli, for instance, that require that you invest some time in knowing how to use money and for what causes and what purposes, and being satisfied that these are good causes and good purposes. And, I can't tell you, only you and Allah know what would pose a financial danger to you, meaning you're giving too much. But I can tell you that my belief and my conviction is that that it is a matter of faith and trust in Allah, that Allah will take care of you, that Allah will care for you, and that I can do without the money, but I cannot do with Allah's grace. I can afford to give away the money, but I cannot afford to give away satrillah, that divine blessing that comes in the most unpredictable, unexpected way, and saves me. And that is a and the more from experience, the more one sacrificed, the more that sense of tranquility and assuredness in a it's as if Allah personally speaks to you, telling you when to worry and when not to worry. As we say, لن يضيعك Allah, that Allah will not waste you and or cause you to be lost. But it is it is always, in my experience, it is always the rich that are the most concerned. It is always the ones who have the strongest conscientiousness about not giving are always the people who actually don't have much. And it is always the rich that should be concerned. Like the ones who should be worried that they're not giving enough are the ones who don't worry. And in my experience, it's the ones who have this like serious sense of, oh, maybe I'm not giving enough. It's usually the ones who don't have much.
But we don't want to discriminate against the rich.
We don't want to discriminate against the rich, of course. That's Rami's philosophy, newfound philosophy. Okay, and we'll go do iftar and pray Maghrib, inshallah.
Okay, so we're going to start live streaming Taraweeh tonight.
Oh, we will? Okay.
Yeah, but just so people... Okay, so normally the Taraweeh starts right when Aisha starts in Columbus, Ohio time. So if people want to look that up online to know when to log on to the live stream. But tonight we still have to do Maghrib and you have to eat. And it's right now it's 8:24. So what time do you want to do Taraweeh at?
9:15.
9:15? You think that's enough time?
Yeah? Is that enough time? 9:30?
If we're going to go live, safe to do 9:30.
Okay, 9:30.
Okay. All right, so
9:30 sharp.
At 9:30, but for all other days it's right at Aisha Adhan time for those who want to log on. Yeah.
Okay.
Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. And thank you, Rami, and thank you, Whiskey, for your very valuable contributions and for your, I am sure, love-concealed poetry. You conceal your love very well, but thank you for everything. Okay, and thank you guys being with us. Assalamu alaikum.